Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today in the first of many virtual sessions you'll have in this virtual ASFPM. You're joining session A5 about the risk communication tools. Here's a quick rundown of the format. You'll see a 20 to 25-minute presentation from the presenters that was pre-recorded, and at the end, we'll go through the Q&A. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a tab named Q&A. You can enter your questions there during the session, and I'll moderate those. Any questions that we're not able to verbally get to, we will get to the presenters and get back to you with answers. Join and watch the session, and at the bottom right-hand side of the screen, you can expand your viewing window in order to utilize the full screen. So, want to make sure we get enough time for questions. Let's go ahead and get to the first presenter, Wes Shaw with Urchin LLC, and his presentation, If You Build It, They Probably Won't Come.
Is this thing on? Hello? Hi. Hi, my name is Wes Shaw, and I'm guessing I know a bunch of you who are on this webinar, but of course I can't really see you right now, which is a little strange, so I'll just look knowingly into the crowd and say, hey, good to see you. Good to see you. Yeah. I want to start off by introducing my partner in this presentation, my lovely assistant, Chris Ray, but just a few disclosures first. He's definitely not lovely, and he's technically not even my assistant because he's the co-developer instead, and I try to boss him around, but he doesn't listen. So anyway, this is Chris, and quick PSA, in a little bit, I'm going to hand over the microphone to Chris and let him talk for a little bit, but just I want you to keep one thing in mind when that happens, which is that Scottish does not equal charming. You're going to hear his voice, and some of you are going to go, oh, but don't do that. Just remember, Scottish does not equal charming. Anyway, the next 20 minutes or so, we'll be handing the presentation back and forth to each other in a way that will probably be distracting for some of you. However, let's be honest, we've all been sitting around screens a lot for the past few months, so our attention spans have suffered somewhat. So really, I think we might be doing us all a favor. So technically, hey, you're welcome. And grab a third glass of coffee and let's dig in and go.
Today, we are going to talk about MyCoast, which is a project that we have been working on for about 7 years. Specifically, we wanted to take a look at all the data we've gathered over these 7 years and see what we could pick out of it. Now, getting a little ahead of ourselves, which is the thing I like to do, let me back up half a step and answer the obvious question, which is, what is MyCoast? If I had to put it in one slide, I guess I would say that it is a citizen science tool for documenting coastal data. So we help people get data into a system so people can use it. Yeah, that's not very helpful, is it? That's a little pretentious. How about this? It's a website and an app. And what it allows people to do is go out and take a picture, and then that picture is turned into a report. So the picture comes in and we say, hey, what were the weather conditions like then? What were the tidal conditions like then? And we put it on a map and all that sort of thing. So it is used around the country for things including documenting storm damage, tracking really high tides, geolocating abandoned boats, also figuring out where large marine debris is. Recently, there's been some more interest and a lot uptick in use for people who are trying to track how living shorelines are doing over time. And we also have a sort of a somewhat different, more involved feature that allows people to adopt beaches. And when they adopt beaches, they can go out there and pick up trash, and then we record where every bit of trash is. And this is a report from one person going out picking up some trash, and you can see the sort of hotspots of where the trash was located. So, even a little less abstract, and I just want to show you what this looks like if you actually fire up the app. I'm going to mirror it onto my monitor here, and yes, I've switched monitors and microphones, so I'm sure I sound different now. But on the left, you can see what is essentially showing on my phone screen right now, and on the right, it's just a browser window. So I'm just going to hit that big orange button at the bottom here that says Add Report. I'm going to say I want to do a king tide report. Then I'm going to hit the take a photo button and aim out my window. I take a picture, select use photo. So now it's processing that photo. You can see I can also pick from the library. I can change the date and time if I need to, but of course it has figured out the date and time for right here, right now. I can add a comment there in the bottom, but I'm just going to hit the orange button and say set location. You can see where I am. If I want to correct that, I could say actually I'm over here on the beach, and then I hit submit. And you can see the bar up at the top suggests that is uploading off into the server now.
So while that's happening, the photo and the metadata are getting sent to the server. The server is then taking a look and saying, okay, what do we know about, what can we say about this time and place, and what's happening right there, right now? So then if I go to the browser window, I'm going to open up this report, which has been generated. There we go. And you can see here, there's the photo that I just took. Here's the date and time put in, obviously, or excuse me, the date and time put in. But we've also got some weather conditions. We've got it out here on a map, and now it's in there in the system, so it could be searched for anywhere else. So we could filter by all sorts of different things and pull this up. If I want to see king tide reports around where I am, we can do all of that because all of that is put in. You can see with minimal effort by the person who is actually running the app. It all happens by the servers.
I would like to tell you more about all these in detail, but we do have 113 slides, and this is, I believe, number 29, so probably we should just press on here. Over the 7 years, we have collected about 5,300 users and about 12,000 reports, and we are pushing 18,000 pictures. That's a growing number. We got a bit of data here, and our whole goal with this has always been not to collect all the data and keep it ourselves, but instead to create this tool that allows information to flow between people and our end users, which are usually states. And hopefully then the states can use that to inform coastal decisions. It also works in the other direction where we have set up mechanisms like emails and in-app alerts and stuff that allow the states to contact users, which lets MyCoast be used as a pretty effective outreach tool. So that's it for the introduction. Now let's get into the data. Before we do that, a real quick disclaimer. Neither Chris nor I are data scientists. We don't know any data scientists. This data has never been looked at by data scientists. We're not sure data scientists even technically really exist, although perhaps there are some of you listening right now, so you might beg to differ otherwise. But look, we know you're all smart people, and you probably, unlike us, have had plenty of coffee. So rather than talk down to you, we thought we'd just show you the data, and you can see the obvious trends in it. So here's the data. Fascinating, right? I'm glad we have 20 minutes for this because it just takes a little while to go. Oh, sorry. Okay, yes, it does get a little old after a while. Fine. Here's the data in a different format. Huh? Is that better? Good data, right? So that's what we got. Thanks very much. Okay, never mind. But look, we're going to break it down for you for those of you who are maybe still half asleep or who don't stare at data all day long. And we have 6 takeaways that go over sort of the main things we pulled out of it as we dove into the data. Okay, takeaway 1. When you're putting together your data collection project, it's worth spending the time to figure out what your goals are and then design the product accordingly. Now, this sounds obvious, but just bear with me for a second here. If I were to ask you, why do you want to build this tool? You might say, well, because I want the data, and that's fine. And you might also say, well, it's an outreach project. We want people to know about things like king tide, so having them document them is a good way for them to be more aware that they exist. And then you also might say, well, look, we actually really want it for both, right? That's the easy answer. And that's fine, but spend a little time thinking about, do you mostly want the data and are a little bit interested in outreach? Or are you mostly interested in outreach and the data is just sort of an added perk? Now, why does this matter? Well, I'll tell you. We have approximately 5,300 users. It's convenient to think that they're all the same, but in reality, of course, they're not. And you can split them up any number of different ways. But one that we did that we were sort of interested in was, what if we split out the government people from the non-government people? Now, we didn't do this very scientifically. We just looked at the email addresses and filtered out the ones that came from .govs or .state.us sort of email addresses. And it sort of seems like there are a bunch of each, which is true, but really it's about a 2/3, 1/3 split. And okay, so again, why does this matter when you're developing your product? I'll tell you why. Imagine who you want to gather the sort of data you want. So think about king tides or any sort of flooding where you're not looking for like detailed information. You just need to know, hey, this is an area where this is flooded. If this is an outreachy sort of project or a non-technical one, maybe you are totally fine having all sorts of random people to sort of citizen science recording stuff, and that data is all good no matter what, because all you're asking them to do is take a picture. If, on the other hand, you're asking them to take a picture and also fill out a form to document different types of storm damage, and you need to be able to trust that what they say is actually what they're seeing because they have some expertise or some specific training or whatever else, then you might target that differently. So it might be easier to target the government people for the second one and for the king tide to really do the general audience. So think about, as you're putting together the form or as you're trying to recruit people, who best matches your end goals.
Hi everyone. I'm going to take our second takeaway. Our app, like a lot of apps in this field, is one that you use in a very specific situation, and it doesn't happen very often. So, you know, you don't happen to have found anything covered in creosote on the beach recently, you wouldn't really have a reason to use MyCoast. And we find that, you know, out of sight, out of mind, and people will get the app that they have to use to report a pothole or whatever, and then, you know, 6 months later they see another one, they've forgotten what the app was called, and, you know, or that you could even do this. And so one of the things we've tried to do is to allow people to do something in your system as well as the core reporting purpose. So we're just going to give some stuff for free that people can use whenever they fancy, and they'll keep the app in their mind for when they really do have to use it to report something. And that's what we call our sandcastle features. And if you look on the, this next slide shows a few of the main screens in the app. The one on the very left is the front screen of the app. So as you can see, there's a big add report button, which is the main, you know, what it's mainly for. But then above that, we have a couple of pictures from previous reports. We have a king tide, high tide chart at the top, and you can click on the buttons under there and see various other bits of tide information. We call it sandcastle features because I use this app to work out when to build sandcastles for my children so that they flood at the right time.
South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control, and they wanted to track these boats because they had some funding to pull boats out. So abandoned boats come in a variety of shapes and sizes, from very big to don't even know if this quite qualifies as a boat, but it is somewhat boat-like.
It's the same as your boat.
It is nicer than my boat. That's true, Chris. But thanks for your participation. There are boats all over the place. So these are the boat reports we've gotten in. So people have gone out and taken pictures of these things and documented them. But what I wanted to focus on is that that is not where the process stops. In South Carolina, the state went out and has been removing some of these boats. So they use the people to figure out where the boats are, and then they go out, and as they have funding, they remove the boats. People then know, look, I went out there and I took this picture and something happened. And it doesn't happen right away. It doesn't always happen, but there is it is not just feeding into a black hole somewhere to be forgotten. Similar and closer to where Chris and I are, in the state of Washington, they have a big problem with creosote piles. Over decades in Puget Sound, lots of people had docks and they built them with creosote treated wood, and then the docks have slowly degraded over time and fallen apart and have washed all over the place. And they are in all sorts of shapes and sizes. This picture here, the primary sort of piece of lumber there is creosote treated, but you can see it sort of blends in. I mean, if you're walking down the beach looking for it, it's not too hard to find, but it's not the sort of thing where you would fly over with an airplane and quickly pick out where the spots were and grab it all. So we created a way that people can go out and snap a picture of it, and it goes into a database, and it's been heavily used. Last time we checked, there are almost 1,300 pieces of creosote piles that have been reported all around the state of Washington, and the state of Washington has been very actively working to get them out of there again. So takeaway 4, outreach. Outreach via websites and apps and everything else is a tricky thing. We've seen lots of states try different things, and then we've seen things happen that are or not related to those efforts. I want to talk about the state of Massachusetts for a second. Massachusetts was one of our first clients. They were looking primarily at recording storm damage, but they also had a little bit of interest in king tides, which was something that was getting bigger in South Carolina. So they eventually asked us to do some king tide tracking tools inside their MyCoast, and we set that up. And they didn't push it very hard, and it sort of got some reports here and there. But then all of a sudden there was a giant spike, and it coincided with this this article in the Boston Globe, which then somehow ended up, as these things go, in the New York Times, and then in the London Times. And the interesting thing about this, or one of the interesting things about this, is that the state of Massachusetts did not start this effort. To the best of our knowledge, it was pushed by the New England Aquarium, who saw a tool that they liked and decided to, hey, let's use this, it's available. And so they got word out, and they worked with their press people, and they didn't just send out a press release, they went out and called the newspapers and talked to them and got things engaged. So that worked really well. It just wasn't exactly what we planned or knew was coming. So we went from, a couple reports here and there to hundreds coming in a day. Of course, no outreach conversation these days can happen without social media. I'm not a big social media guy, and neither is Chris, so we're probably not the right people for that. But thankfully, this is a time when other people can really step in. Amongst our states, Washington has done a tremendous job pushing stuff. And I'm not sure how exactly they got like the Commissioner of Public Lands to talk about us, but she did. And that became a big spike in our traffic. And then the San Juan County Marine Resources Committee also shared posts on Facebook. And this drove new users, which drove new traffic. So that's it's been a learning exercise watching what people try really hard at, what we try really hard at, and then the results that come out of it. So we don't have a silver bullet for it, but it's a very interesting process.
All right, back to me. Our takeaway 5. Users are a great thing. It's very important, and a lot of companies seem to measure themselves purely on number of signed up users. And Wes and I have discovered, well, not all users are the same, and I'm going to explain a little bit about what that means in more detail. As Wes mentioned, we have 5,500 users, so we've got 10,000 reports. So I would imagine we have something along the lines of 2 reports a user. Not exactly. We have 4,000 users who've submitted no reports whatsoever, leaving 1,300 to make them all. So that's about 8 reports per person. It doesn't really work that way either. So this is a pie chart. I used to work on Excel for Microsoft, and we were told never to use pie charts. But this is a pie chart showing 1,097 users that have contributed something and how much they did in terms of reports. So that means like storm damage, tidal flooding, king tides, etc. And you can see that there are not 1,097 very obvious segments in here. We have some users who are much higher volume than others, and that's even more noticeable if you look at the beach cleanup. So we've collected something like 100,000 items of trash from beaches, but if you look at that, 50,000 of the items came from 43 of them, and looking at that chart, there's something like, let's call it 40,000 of them came from 2 of them. So users can be all different. You have users who do nothing and users who do an awful lot. And what do we learn from that, and how do we use that? Well, one thing we've done is we try to do as much as possible for every single user, because you never know which ones of yours are going to be champions. And so here's an example of an email that was sent to us. Now, I ought to point out that the DHEC beach cleanup system used to be pieces of paper and pens before they started using MyCoast. And this is an email from someone who quite reasonably says, I've been, reporting beach items for ages. I filled in all these forms. They were great. And now you've got an app and, it's too difficult for us to use. Can we have the form back? And of course, they can have the form back, but it makes the data a little bit more difficult to merge in with the new stuff that's all geotagged. So I wrote him back an email. I said, look, understood entirely. Is there anything we could do to help? And he said, well, if you change the app so we could enter more than one, we could click on cigarette butts and then enter 10 of them rather than having to click it 10 times, that would be pretty usable. And Wes and I thought, that's actually a pretty good idea. So we made a bug for it. We wrote some computer program. And we tested it out. And I sent him a mail saying, we've done it. And he wrote back saying, used it this morning and it works fine. He did actually continue down this mail to list some other things that we then had to fix. But this is a guy who's now out cleaning beaches and sent us a mail initially saying, we're not going to use this.
Okay, so the final takeaway we have sort of merges several of these together, which is there are a lot of things that are under your control and some that aren't. You can sometimes leverage each of them. And to sum this all up, here's that table I showed you really briefly early on, this time with some keys on it, so you could see what's happening on here. The red dots are push notifications where states send out notifications to individuals to say, hey, there's a storm coming in, or there's a particularly high tide, can you document it? The blue dots were efforts to engage with the media, both social media and the print media. And the green dots are sort of unhelpfully everything else. And you can see there are a lot of spikes around green dots. So I think that the overall trend, it seems to be driven by the red and the blue. And we just slowly build up reports over time. But these spikes happen for things like storms that you cannot plan, or when a partner of yours or even an unknown partner of yours goes out and makes a big media push and you didn't see it coming, and all of a sudden you have hundreds of reports coming in. That's not to say that I think that the takeaway for us here is that slow and steady does eventually just build and build and build, but a lot of it's just going to be out of your hands. And when the storm comes in, if you have a way to contact those people and get them out, great. If not, sometimes you can't, and you're still going to get a bunch of reports, and sometimes you won't. It's just there's a lot of, I would like to say art instead of science, but I really just think it's luck involved in it. So yeah, be lucky. There's the takeaway for that. So the very, very final takeaway, to go back to the title of our talk. If you only build it, they almost certainly won't come. But if you design the product to match your goals, if you include features to keep people engaged, if you explain or better show people what you're doing with the data, if you think less about press releases and more about press relationships, if you care for your users, and if you recognize ultimately the limits of what's under your control, you too may someday have almost 18,000 pictures of all sorts of things, including a squash. So thanks very much. That's our talk today. And our contact information is up here. You can see our primary sponsors. We have a bunch sort of more smaller sponsors, that, but these are the core ones that have been around for a long time. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Yeah, you can find us on Twitter at MyCoast.
Well, there's a Q&A right now, right?
Yes, and of course the Q&A is about to start right now. Yeah, naturally, right now at Chris, look at your watch. It's 7:47 a.m. or something. I don't know.
We could be professional television people, I tell you.
And that's a wrap.
If you build it, he will come. If you build it, he will come.
If you build what, who will come?
Didn't say.
I hate it when that happens.
Me too.
It's 7:47 a.m.
Hi there, you all. Thank you so much. First off, I just wanted to make sure I passed on some feedback to you. First off, the crowd is loving your... Oh.
If you build what, who will come?
Didn't say.
I hate it when that happens.
Me too.
Well, hi there, everyone. Welcome back. Just a quick few questions for you, Wes. Hi there, you all. Thank you so much.
Fire away.
First off, I just wanted to mess that up. I'm sorry. Passed on some feedback to you. First off, the crowd is loving your... They're loving your humor. I might have messed that up a big time. Sorry.
No, we're done.
It's a delay. Well, hi there, everyone. Welcome back. Just a quick few questions from you, Wes.
Fire away.
You're loving your humor. So I have a question for you here. Mainly, what's the geographic area of the application used, and where is it available for? There's a new reporter in the Chesapeake area if it covers that area.
Yeah, great question. And that does seem like the sort of thing we should have put in that, doesn't it? But the general scope is we're working with various states, and the number keeps growing. But right now we are in Massachusetts, South Carolina, Washington, parts of the Gulf of Mexico, and other parts of the Gulf of Maine, and New Hampshire. So those sorts of areas. We're talking to a couple other states right now about getting launched soon. And the specific tools vary from state to state. So some states have king tides. Actually, I think all states have king tides. Some have storm damage reporting. Only a few have things like abandoned boats or creosote. It depends on what the state finds most useful.
Mainly, what's the geo area? That's great. And just to make sure I'm clear, is this a tool that you interact with on a website, or is it an application? Can you give us the information for both of those?
Yeah, so there is both a website and a mobile app for iOS and Android. So any way you want to get into it is fine. The most of our input, most of our reporting comes via the apps now. We originally started off with just the website. We tried, as I bet lots of people have tried, to make the website friendly enough to make it work well enough on a phone to replace an app, but it just doesn't work that way. The dedicated apps have been really key to us being able to get this widely used, and it also allows the app to be used offline and some other things you can't do with the website.
That's great. I really love your sandcastle idea for regular participation. What else might you pick up, like sea glass or other things like of that nature? The question that I have, though, related to that is, would you consider your app more of a data push or a data gathering and collection tool?
Yeah, good question. So it really depends on the state itself. In Massachusetts, they really want the storm damage tool. That's their main thing that they've been pushing for years out there. And before we came along, people would phone the information in, and then they had some sort of paper format, and we helped them sort of move it forward a few notches technologically. So they really want that data, because then they can make storm damage assessments, and they can decide how to allocate their limited resources to respond to the storm. In South Carolina, it's been a bigger push on the king tides thing, where they would really like to help people become more aware of these extreme high tide events. And so there, it's been more of a let's get the information out to the general population. And they still use the photos that come in for proof, for ground truthing models and that sort of thing. But that the big push for that has been to engage people.
There's a question about this information being digitally available, and I just wanted to remind folks in the session that all of these presentations are recorded and will be available for their utilization, and they can interconnect with them again through the end of the year. Another question that was brought in by Jacob, he says, do you send the information about floods to agencies so they can act appropriately? And if you do that, is it automatic?
Yeah, so the data, they come in and we work with the states to get them the information however they want it. So in the very beginning, when we would have a report or two come in, it would send an email each time a report came in. And then when that jumped up to the hundreds of reports coming in, states said, we don't want an email for every report that comes in. Let us go. So we have a live stream page where they can log in and watch each report sort of come in and respond from that. So we can do alerts, we can do whatever else the state wants. It's all the tools are built on our end, but we really at the beginning thought we should make lots and lots of notifications, but we later backed off of that because it just got too it's just a bit overwhelming.
Understood. And then people are getting a little more territorial. People are asking, what about funding sources in the state of Florida specifically?
Yeah, that, as you can imagine, is a popular question. So we do usually work with people at the state level. In a few situations, we've worked at the county level. So if folks are interested, reach out to us. And the way the funding has worked has often been, it started from sort of on high, sort of at the federal level, and worked through the state. Or so we're happy to talk to folks to figure out what their needs are and then how we can help out. But yeah.
All right. I know that this is a lot of people's first session. We had some technical difficulties, and I do want to apologize that. But one last question. Somebody would like you to touch on takeaway number 3 one more time. And then there's a question about any handouts that you might have about your tools.
Well, I hate to say this is a bit embarrassing here, but I was one of those people having technical difficulties, so I didn't watch my presentation this morning, and I don't remember off the top of my head what takeaway 3 even was.
I believe it was outreach is difficult or challenging, potentially.
I have lots to say about that. I'm not really sure I could wrap it all up in 1 minute. Whoever asked that question, please shoot me an email, and I'd be happy to go on and on about it at great length if you had any questions about specific questions, or if you just want to talk broadly, we can have our virtual coffee this morning, because it's definitely not time for beer yet. But and we'll talk between the sessions.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both so much for your presentation and your insight. And I really appreciate your willingness to talk about what doesn't work, because that's sometimes the most important thing, to understand what didn't work so that you can make modifications. Thank you, Wes.
Our pleasure. And I see my useless business partner has now finally
Yeah,
joined us.
I now have audio, which I was lacking previously.
Well, welcome. And thank you.
Hi.
All right. Well, let's keep this session rolling. It's 9:30 on the dot, and we'll move to our second presentation, Miss Kristin Murphy, talking about outreach and how to build a plane while flying it.
Good afternoon. I'm Kristin Murphy. I am a strategy and management consultant with Booz Allen Hamilton. I have spent the last 16 or so years of my career transforming government and industry. My main focus areas are resilience and sustainability, and I lead engagements that really run the gamut of business strategy, marketing and communications, analytics, and program lifecycle solutions. So you may remember me from such ASFPM presentations as what data science reveals about the value of floodplain management, understanding the role of mental shortcuts and cognitive biases in the way our brains process risk and probability, and now piloting resilience innovation, how to build the plane while flying it. Basically, I like to come here and talk about new ways of looking at old problems. So sort of what is the impetus of me being here today? It's becoming more and more complex to drive people to mitigate. Risks are rising, and I think that those actions to reduce risk are not rising in a commensurate way. And I think, the challenging thing is that often, even when people are convinced that mitigation is the right thing to do and that they should do it, they often don't. And I think, one thing that we all recognize is that some of our traditional approaches around technical assistance or education and outreach, while they are effective in raising awareness and understanding, they don't always reliably lead to action. And I think we know now we've got additional science and tools that sort of tell us that resilience is a much more complex problem than just a communications problem. Requires some better data, some better strategic approaches, some better behavioral science and social marketing knowledge. But those things are new, and it's a lot bigger of a challenge than where before we were just mostly focused on outreach and education, right? So it's a little easier to keep on doing what we've been doing all along instead of trying some new approaches and tools. And then I think, the bigger barrier to innovation in trying new things is often that it feels like a risk. And I think for public programs in particular, without a way to manage innovation smartly, the idea of testing new things feels like a big bet to take with taxpayer dollars, which sort of doesn't always feel like the right thing to do. And so what I wanted to do is come here today to talk about institutionalizing innovation. How do you build a better plane while you're flying it? And I am going to lean on a lot of agile management methodologies and behavioral science and social marketing principles, but I'm going to try to steer away from talking jargon today and really focus on 4 main points. So the first is and these principles are really sort of the foundation of building a managed innovation culture, and being able to evolve your organization or evolve your program from where it is today to the future, where it better meets the mission, the much more complex and dynamic world that we're living in. And so these 4 principles are: the first is start with who, not what. Don't throw a great idea out there to do something without first considering who you are really targeting with that approach. The second is document like a scientist. Create the playbook to make your approach repeatable, especially successful ones. The third principle is to embrace failure. Failure needs to be equated to learning and insight instead of failure. And then finally, the fourth principle, which sort of begets all of the other ones, is that you need to keep it small and manageable. And so my hope is that by the end of this presentation, everybody will feel a bit more comfortable with ways to test new ideas while sort of maintaining your day job. And bringing those ideas back into your organization, learning from them, scaling them up so that you can evolve to the future in a managed, meaningful way that doesn't feel quite as daunting, right? So first principle is, again, starting with the who and not the what. I think a lot of us have been in a situation where we ourselves or our colleagues have come up with a great idea, a great new shiny thing to try or a great new shiny thing to build. But it was sort of thought up in a vacuum irrespective of who we were really trying to get to do that thing or use a new thing. And so often the idea could be really great, but if we are not bringing that idea to the right audience, it may not be all that successful, an otherwise great idea. And so really starting with who, especially when it comes to the behavioral challenge that mitigation is, starting with the who is so much more important than starting with the what. Of course, the science also, the social science really supports this idea that two different individuals, two different communities could be presented with the exact same set of information and options and respond very differently depending on how that information or those options are framed to them. And so it really does make a lot of sense to start with sort of who first. If we understand where our audience is, whether they be individuals or community officials or others, where they are coming from, how their unique experiences and challenges and characteristics drive how they, weigh and decide on the actions that they're going to take. The more we understand that, the better off we are with finding the right approaches to influence their behaviors. And so a couple tips here, you'll find this is the device I'm going to use throughout the presentation, is that there will be a couple of tips on each of these slides into how you can institute this principle. So tips here for targeting, for tailoring to the who and not the what. The first is group, right? Group and segment. Group your audiences by their defining attributes, whether those be demographic characteristics, their beliefs and attitudes, their adjacent behavioral patterns that sort of matter to the core core behavior that you're trying to drive, and then maybe most importantly, pick one or two of those segments where you've got the best opportunity for impact for risk reduction. So find a segment where there's the biggest gap in insurance coverage, or find a segment where there's a lot of at-risk structures that haven't been mitigated and focus there. This is a departure from how we typically do things, where we're trying to reach the largest number of people possible. And really, this is a much more targeted approach at a certain type of audience segment. The second thing to do is to analyze that segment of audience, right? Really seek to understand what is driving their behaviors and what is stopping them from actually taking mitigation action. This is what we call barriers and benefits, or barriers and motivated. We want to know why people can't or won't mitigate, because we need to overcome those barriers somehow. And we also need to find the reasons why they are motivated to take certain actions. And this is what we call the emotional hook. What do they care most about that's just going to drive them towards mitigation? And then the third element here is really, it's sort of the cycle of defining and refining the specific call to action for this audience and how we frame it up to them. And so we really, it's not just about this, when you target, it's not just about deciding, which audience segment you're going to target and analyze. It's also about really targeting the specific action that we're going to ask them to take, and what action makes the most sense for them to take. And we define and refine that action or that ask based on what we call the benefits exchange. And this is really important when it comes to influencing behavior. We have got to find a way to ask that audience to do something where the benefits of that behavior outweigh the benefits of continuing to do what they've always done immediately. And that's a really tough thing to say. You will realize the benefits of this, risk reduction behavior very, 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 very soon. And it's better than continuing on doing what you've been doing, which is maybe nothing or something that's ineffective. And so this last step of defining and refining the ask is really important. I think we often will just throw a menu out to our audiences and say, here, pick. And we have to do a much better job of picking something specific and framing it up so that they understand those benefits. So the second principle is document like a scientist. So why? Really, and this quote, I love this quote from Reid Hoffman around sort of the experience in Silicon Valley about how the first scaler advantage beats the first mover. So it's not enough to have a great idea. It's not even enough to have proven that that idea works. What you have to do is create the playbook for that idea to go big, right? So to prove that your great idea actually works, and you got to attract capital, whether that be social capital, political capital, financial capital, to make it go big. And then you also have to provide the SOP for other people to repeat your great idea, your great approach, or your great project. And so in order to do that, we need to document. I think we've all, again, been in a position where we say, hey, I've got this great idea, or let's on our way to doing something that we always do, tweak it a little bit and try this new thing, but we don't document why we did that, how we did it, and then what the impacts were at the end, so we can figure out as an organization or as a program whether or not we want to keep on doing that thing. And so tips to document like a scientist, tips to create your playbook. The first thing that you need to document is your hypothesis. So what is it that you're setting out to do? Why is it important? Who is your target audience, which we just talked about? What do we want them to do? We also just talked about that. What's the specific action? And what do we think they will do as a result of some new approach that we're pitching? And then during this hypothesis phase, we also want to define what we believe success looks like in quantitative measures. How can we measure that a person, that our target, whether that's a community or an individual or otherwise, how can we measure that that person or group is leading towards taking action? And then how do we measure that they've taken the action that we wanted them to take? The second thing that you need to document is the procedures themselves. And those are both the specific tech steps that you're taking to carry out your project so that it can be replicated by others, but also the specific steps that you've taken to collect data and analyze your results. And so again, this is really where the rubber meets the road. This is where you allow colleagues, other programs, other FEMA regions, for example, other states, to other folks within your division to replicate your project, to use the same key messages that you use, to use the same sort of branded materials or look and feel that you used, to target the same kinds of audiences that you targeted, because that's where this approach is more likely to work, to measure their results as well. So this is really where the rubber meets the road. This is how you can start small and then go big. It's with this documentation. And then the final piece, which sort of helps with the investment and with scaling and for decision makers and executives, is documenting your results. What happened? Did what happened, was it what we expected to happen? Do we expect that we could replicate it again if we tried? And so this is about attribution. Do we believe that our project is the thing that actually led to the change in behavior that led to these results versus random, or this is just what typically happens, right? And then it answers the final question, which is, should we replicate it again? Were these results better than what we've been doing? And so this is really the big question of, should we go big? And this is where we ask ourselves if the project was effective. So that is document like a scientist. The third principle is to embrace failure. This is a big one. And I think, we've all heard these cliches before around, the fastest way to succeed is to double your failure rate. But truthfully, failure is really important for an organization's evolution from the now to the future to meet a much more complex and dynamic mission, failure represents insights. For an organization to evolve, it is just as important to know what doesn't work as it is to know what does. And so you have to have an organizational culture or a program culture that really embraces learning from failure, that really sees failure as an opportunity for learning and not as a sort of personal statement of value, right, about the idea itself. And so this begins with building an innovation culture within your organization or within your program. And there's a couple of ways that you can start to do that. So the first is to reduce the cost of failure. And this is both the social cost of failure and the actual cost of failure. We'll talk about the actual cost of failure a little bit in the fourth principle around keeping your pilot tests small and focused. But in order to really incentivize the innovation culture around embracing failure, reducing the social cost of failure is really important. You have to make people feel comfortable with failure. And so that really requires sort of shifting the norm in your organization. And I think all organizations by default are, start from a place of success equals success and failure equals failure. It's the very sort of Webster's dictionary definition of that. But when you're building an innovation culture, we really want to be shifting the norm towards a new definition of failure, which is more one of learning and insights. And we also need to be shifting the norm of how often failure occurs. So we need to make failure common and expected and something that everybody does, so that a project not working is no longer a statement or a reflection about the person or the team that did the project, and it is more about the insights and the learning that we gained from that experience. So if you can shift the norm and reduce the social cost of failure, the less people will avoid actually offering and testing their new ideas. The second thing that you can do to build an innovation culture is to reward learning versus the success of a project. So how do you do that? You need to publicize the results of every single one of your tests or every single one of your new projects or approaches, whether they were, quote, successful or not. So, and then the next thing that you do in publicizing those pilot projects is that you need to celebrate the gaining of insights. Whether your hypothesis was proven correct or incorrect, you need to celebrate the fact that you learned what didn't work, that you learned what did. And sometimes, and in fact, most times, pilot tests have a good smattering of both things that were successful and things that were not so successful. And so there's always learning. And if your organization equates success with learning versus success with a correct or incorrect sort of hypothesis about a project or an idea, the better off you'll be in institutionalizing that learning and innovation in the future. And then the final, and again, maybe the most important piece, right, is to actually act on the insights that you get from these projects. You need to institutionalize the learning from these pilots. And so what does that mean? That means bringing those insights back into sort of the standard operating procedures of the organization, integrate them into SOPs, integrate the insights into trainings and onboarding, integrate them into performance plans. This is the way that you incentivize the action of sort of every single person on your team learning from the results of innovation. And then the final piece is stop doing things that don't work. Stop. And this gives you this permission structure, I think, to stop doing things that don't work, because you have a well-documented sort of reason why what didn't work. But what you should see in an organization's evolution, if they've embraced the culture of innovation, is that you should see gradually that they are putting down things that no longer work or are not effective, and that at the same time they're picking up testing new ideas, scaling new ideas. And so if you are acting on your insights from your pilots and you are not doing things that are not working anymore, innovation becomes sort of resource neutral, right? It's a wash. If you're putting down things that don't work and you're picking up things that do, it becomes a wash. So it's really important to stop doing things that don't work. Otherwise, your pipeline does get bigger no matter how small you try to keep these projects. Which leads me to my next principle, which is keep it small. And the fourth principle of keeping it small begets all of the others. So, I think this is something that we are all, I think, guilty of, is that we think of innovation and it's sort of immediately synonymous in our mind with revolution. And we kind of believe that in order to be innovative, we need to sort of change the world with one great idea, eat the elephant in one bite. And really, our gig in influencing people's decisions and behaviors around mitigation and flood insurance, it's a much more nuanced, targeted, incremental kind of change, right? There is probably not one revolutionary idea that's just going to change the game when it comes to influencing people's behavior around mitigation. And so it is really best to keep innovation in small chunks rather than big, massive projects for a lot of reasons. I think, not the least of which is that this go big or go home attitude often stops more people from innovating than not, right? Because it's, again, going back to the beginning of the presentation, it feels too big. It feels too scary. People are loss averse. They don't want to get involved in a huge project. And so taking on innovation in small bite-sized chunks is a much more meaningful and manageable way to evolve your organization from where you are now to where you want to be in the future. So ways to do that. The first is divide and conquer. So whittle those ideas down to meaningful and manageable chunks. And it is very likely that some of your ideas are going to be big, they're going to be visionary, and they need to be chunked out. So small, meaningful, manageable chunks, put them in a backlog, prioritize the elements of that idea that you want to test first in sequence, and go through it in a sequential way. So some ways to whittle down to meaningful and manageable chunks, and this gets back to some of the targeting conversation from the first principle, target down to small geographies or neighborhoods. You could, test with really, really targeted audience types, so very specific demographic characteristics, for example, or very specific attitudes. You could whittle down based on very, very specific behavioral motivators or barriers, like an affordability barrier could be sort of the small chunk that you're going to focus on. Or people with companion animals might be a very, very specific motivator that you're going to focus on. And then also another way to whittle down is to focus on very specific target actions. Target a very specific mitigation action like a buyout, or like contents only policies, or something like that. And so, and again, it forces you down to focus on all these other areas too. But these are some easy ways to whittle down to a manageable but meaningful chunk. Second piece is function over form. Prioritize speed and good ideas and working ideas versus, beauty, perfect, polished. Make sure that you get your ideas out on the street and test whether or not they're effective. And so in some ways you have to prioritize speed and function over, again, polished and perfect. Ways to do that: set the deadline and meet it, even if that means that you're scaling back elements of your project. And that could just be chunking it out even further and putting a chunk aside in the backlog and testing it at a later date and making your project a little bit smaller. So if your project is right-sized, you should be able to be realizing benefits almost immediately. And if you're not, then I think that you have to go back and take a look at whether or not your project really is bite-sized enough, meaningful, and manageable. So some of the benefits that you should be realizing very soon if you have a right-sized project is that it is easier to attribute successful projects to your intervention or to your approach if it's small and targeted. So rather than random variables in the environment. So small projects are easier to attribute success to. You should be able to continue to do your day job while you innovate. This is how you know your projects are right-sized, is that you can still manage your day-to-day responsibilities while also testing new ideas. You should also feel like documentation is less of a burden if your projects are right-sized. Documenting the playbook for how you tested a new idea shouldn't feel that bad if your project is right-sized. And then finally, if the project is right-sized, going back to the embracing failure, the cost of failure should automatically be lowered. The actual cost and the social cost of failure can be reduced by just having a right-sized project, by having a project that is going out in a meaningful and manageable chunk. So what does this look like in the real world applied? So I have been working with FEMA's floodplain management program for a couple of years now, and floodplain management, as you've probably heard in a number of other sessions, is going through a pretty significant transformation right now across a number of elements of the program. And so if you have a multi-year strategy and you've sort of defined what you want your future to look like, innovation is a necessary part of that mission, of that evolution. And so floodplain management realized pretty early on that they needed to have a way to manage that innovation, to make sure that it was focused towards the endpoint and the goals in their multi-year strategy, and to make sure that they were documenting and learning from those pilots, because there is a lot going on in that organization, and there needed to be a return on the investment of those tests. And so floodplain management last year started to sort of dip their toes in the water of what a managed innovation program could look like. And they stood up this incubator program idea concept, where it really is it's a framework for, capturing and prioritizing good ideas, systematically testing them, and then bringing the learning from those ideas back into the organization, and making intentional decisions about how to scale or why to scale new approaches, what to put down, and what new things to test based on what the organization's annual priorities are. And so last year, they launched the incubator program with 3 flagship pilot projects out of 3 of the FEMA regions, regions 10, 8, and 3. Region 10 did a formative research project where they saw a spike in flood insurance policies along the Bigwood River in Idaho, and went out there to try to get a better understanding of the nuanced reasons for rationale for why people picked up policies at the time that they did and under the circumstances that they did. Region 8 is doing a pilot project that's focused on contents-only policies, so renters in some of the more vulnerable parts of the communities in Denver. So this is an example of a very targeted action, a very targeted audience. And then Region 3 did a really neat project around group policy conversions in West Virginia. So after the 2016 floods in West Virginia, in 2019, those group policies that were established after those floods were reaching their 3-year expiration date. And Region 3, in partnership with the state and several communities, launched a campaign to really, at the time that those policies were expiring, to convert those policies to individual policies. And that's a really exciting project. They used some new approaches that they hadn't used before, and they actually ended up converting more group policies to individual standard policies than we see on a typical, nationwide scale. So it was a successful project. They learned a lot of things. And these 3 projects are sort of the beginning of setting up floodplain management's managed innovation program. And so with that, I will go ahead and close the presentation. Thank you very much. As a recap, there are 4 principles here. Start with the who, not the what. Document like a scientist. Embrace failure, and keep it small. I appreciate the time, and thank you very much.
Hi there, and thanks so much, Kristin, for joining us here for a couple of questions and answers. With that knowledge-packed presentation, we've got time for a few questions, so let me get straight to it. One question was asking about recommendations for measuring attitudes and beliefs.
Yeah, so one of the tougher things to measure, right? I think with attitudes and beliefs, you wanna look at two things, right? Self-report. There's always a way to actually ask people what their attitudes and beliefs are. And then the second way is what we call proxy indicators. So this is where you ask yourself, what does a specific attitude or belief look like in the wild? And you find that in the wild. We use lots of, these days we use social media. We use consumer data around interests and things like that to sort of get a proxy indicator of what somebody's attitude or belief is. You can look at voting records. You can look at a number of things to understand what is likely an attitude and belief, or what that attitude and belief looks like in the wild.
Great. Another question is about documentation of failures. How do you document and share those effectively?
Yeah. So good question. I'm glad somebody asked that question. So, I think it's important to always frame any project, not from the lens of success or failure, but from the lens of what did we learn? Did we prove anything right? Did we prove anything wrong? And so it really becomes less about documenting and promoting success or failure. It's about documenting and promoting the learning. So you should have some sort of standard procedure on a monthly or quarterly or annual basis where you just talk about everything that you learned, whether those things supported your hypothesis, what you thought was going to happen, or they didn't. Both of those insights are very meaningful in terms of how you move forward.
All right, one last question, and then there's a few in the chat pod, if you wouldn't mind responding after we get to the next presentation.
Sure.
This one is, how do you suggest selling any level of innovation when your target client is highly risk averse?
Yeah, so that's the whole reason why I did this presentation in the first place. I think we've all been there. I think we are all, as humans, naturally risk averse. It's one of the things that is really, really interesting about human behavior. And so again, it goes back to that principle around reducing the social cost of failure and reducing the actual cost of failure, right? So what people are most concerned about is the loss, is the potential that something is not going to work, that they will seem like a failure, whether that's socially seem like a failure or actually fail. And so keeping things in manageable bite-sized pieces so that the actual cost of them is low. And then also, again, it's about that culture of really promoting how meaningful insights and learning is, whether it's a sort of success or not. So again, it goes back to social cost of failure and actual cost of failure need to be lowered so that people avoid that potential loss more.
Well, thank you so much for your time and your insights, Kristin. We always learn a bunch from you. Hope to see you again next year. Just to keep us on schedule, and a quick welcome to anybody who's joined session A5 on risk communication tools. You can enter questions for the speakers during the presentation in the Q&A tab all the way on the right. We'll go ahead and get to our third presenter, Brian Edmondson with the Harris County Flood Control District, and his presentation, Billboards versus Facebook, Keys to a Flood Education Program Success.
Hi, my name is Brian Edmondson. I work at the Harris County Flood Control District in Houston, Texas, and I am the program manager on what we call the Modeling, Assessment, and Awareness Project. It's a county-wide flood risk assessment supported in partnership with FEMA as part of our cooperating technical partnership. Thank you to anybody who's out there, and thank you to Falcon for helping set me up. I learned a lot in those 15 minutes, and I wish I could have done that a couple months ago. It would have been super helpful. But again, today I'm going to speak on a lot of the communications aspect of this project, and I'll start with introducing who we are. To work. And yeah, so again, I work at the Harris County Flood Control District. We're a special purpose district created by the Texas legislature in the 1937. This was in response to some devastating floods that occurred in the 20s and the 30s. So a lot of the media that you see today on some of the recent flooding events, this is Harvey and Memorial Day. You know, these events have been happening to us for a long time. A big difference, of course, we have a lot more people here, and we're getting a lot more attention paid to them. We're identified as local sponsor for federal projects. So we've had a huge number of projects that we've been partnership with too, that have been completed and also now ongoing, and a lot being kicked off here in the last few years. Our primary jurisdiction is open channel drainage systems. So just to give you an overview and the scale of what we do here, we have approximately 2,500 miles of channel in Harris County. And that comes to about an 1,800 square mile area, give or minus a little bit how the boundaries change with over time along the north and the east. And but it's important to note that even though we have 2,500 miles of channel, only 1,100 of these miles are actually studied in the flood insurance rate map, which I think is important to note as we talk about some of the communication challenges of this project. Our area, our county is separated into about 22 major watersheds. They run the gamut from, we have more coastally influenced watersheds like Armand Bayou, Clear Creek, up to in the more northern parts of our county. We have major rivers that have a lot more topographic relief and a huge amount of flow. Versus what we're a little bit more known for, which is our more central region, which includes the greater a lot of the greater Houston area, and as well as some others. But here again, we're predominantly clay soils, very flat, and a more bayou type system. But flood control, I work in department here that is part of the Cooperating Technical Partnership program. We one of the big first with FEMA, one of the first projects, big projects that we kicked off and worked with FEMA with on that they actually led was TSARP, following the Tropical Storm Allison following the Tropical Storm Allison in 2001, a countywide effort to remap the floodplains was initiated, called TSARP, and at the time they were pushing the boundaries of technology and utilizing similarly to what we're trying to do now, utilizing the best that's out there to develop a very comprehensive understanding of flood risk across the county. Since then, we've managed that investment through a model management program, which includes what we call a local review process for CLOMARs and LOMARs. So anything that what might end up in a CLOMAR and LOMAR, we offer our support as technical advisors to the floodplain administrators to help review and process those. And we also operate under the federal CLOMAR LOMAR review program to review those CLOMARs and LOMARs once signed by the floodplain administrators here locally. But we've also, over the past few years, performed risk map studies, 1 or 2 a year. And what we're focused on here is some of the special communications projects that are supported by FEMA, and of course MapNext. But why are we doing this big project? We have a few main drivers. The first one being, which I already touched on, is all the recent historic flooding losses that we've seen. I think it's revealed to us and to a lot of the public, a need for further investment in these flood maps. For example, just one example, in Hurricane Harvey, 11% of total structures in Harris County flooded. Of that, about 68% were outside of the 1%. I think if you looked at the 500-year, the 0.2%, I think it's still well above 50%. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but we know we can do better. An important communication issue we like to point out on this is, this is an inherited issue. Prior to the implementation of floodplain regulations in the 1980s, and also comprehensive floodplain mapping, more than 60% of the county had already been developed. More than 2.5 million people already lived here. So many homes and businesses were unknowingly built in floodplains. So it's a problem that exists today. It's part of the reason why we also have in addition to our mega structural flood damage reduction projects that we do, where we deepen widen basins and build detention, we also have one of the biggest buyout programs in the United States. But and I think what we know is importantly is that the better you can understand the floodplains and flood hazards we face, the better will be in the long run for mitigation. Another big driver, which really got the project kicked off, was when we were informed, we were aware of the increase in the precipitations of the standard 100, 500-year events as released by NOAA's Atlas 14. So this is a study that basically sets the standard for precipitation in in Texas, and Harris County was hit especially hard with these increases. So in a 24-hour storm, from the TSART to Atlas 14, basically, we saw about a 30% increase. And the 500 year, again, was about a 30% up to a 40% increase in the amount of rainfall in these events. So that's pretty sizable increases. And I think it's another reason why you might expect to see some of these losses that were missing from the previous floodplains. But then also, again, so that TSARP was kicked off in 2001. We're in 2020. So you can imagine the better methodologies, the better technologies that are out there can provide us a much more detailed, a much better look at the flood risk than previously possible. And so, again, we're looking to set that standard here. And then also just the data, the inputs that go into these models has drastically changed. Everything from the how we calculate imperviousness and again, the terrain that is modeled off of has infinitely improved since since the days of TSARP. And additionally, I mean, just the way we have a much better understanding of how to communicate. We have a ton of lessons learned there, and then also just the modes of how we get that out there. People are using cell phones. People have a lot more access to resources that we are able to make available than ever before. And again, that's a big push that we're looking to achieve in this project. And of course, with all these responses that we were kicking off, and we were partly underway with MapNext, our goals include to empower county residents with flood risk information and education, lead the nation in delivering innovative and reliable floodplain mapping and flood risk analysis, and equip Harris County with up-to-date comprehensive floodplain mapping and flood risk tools. So I think, this encapsulates a lot of what we're trying to achieve here. So of course, we're trying to develop the most innovative and reliable, accurate floodplain information, in the country, and that we possibly can on a countywide basis. But at the same time, we understand that it's only the mitigation that this data can serve is only as good as how we communicate it and how accessible it is. So other very important goals is making the data as accessible as possible and easy to use and understand as possible. In addition to some of the other things that data that we mentioned going in here, but we will be developing watershed-wide 1D, 2D hydraulic models versus in TSARP, we were more individual, stream-by-stream based. We have brand new 2018 LiDAR that was flown, best-in-class DEMs that will be the basis of our topography. We also will be incorporating flood damage reduction projects that may have been completed or will be completed before these maps go live. And with the here in Harris County, we've had a lot of local support with structural flood damage reduction with our bond program, and so a lot of these and with our federal partners are well underway, and some will be complete incorporated. And then also a lot of land use changes and pervious changes as well. Using a slide taken from our FEMA partners, but I think the idea through MapNext and then also the special projects grant that we'll be talking about is the ability to innovate and the ability to really see improve and kind of push boundaries of what of what we're able to do. So we hope with these projects in communications and flood risk analysis and mapping to hopefully set a standard and be able to share that with everybody and push forward on increases in mitigation in every way possible. But so some of the things that we're looking at include, of course, the new flood insurance rate maps. additional products that will now, for the first time, be available countywide that we expect to be more forward-facing is, of course, all the various flood risk products, many of which y'all have probably seen, including depth grids, water source elevation grids, with some of the more innovative ones, including annual chance and 30-year chance. Again, I think bringing the opportunity to move to a more graduated approach to communicating flood risk rather than the in or out of the 100-year, 500-year. We also have the opportunity to, change the narrative and communicate in a more, I think, easily understood way. I mean, we're still ironing out a lot of this, but we understand that when we start talking about 1% AEP, 100-year, it quickly can get very confusing for people. So we're experimenting and looking at ways of communicating this flood risk in a much more easy to understand format, and making that the primary focus of these results, rather than focusing on the some of the the risk ratings and 100-year jargon that can be used very interchangeably in our community, but can be a lot more difficult to understand outside of it. One of the flood risk products that we're really excited about, that we're working on, is the urban flood map, community flooding. But this one, our firm maps, our traditional firm maps, are traditionally created, and they will in this case also be created using models that place the hydrology, place the flows inside the bayou, inside the channels, and let that overflow. And that's how our 1D, 2D models will be created in MapNext. However, since we are creating watershed-wide 1D, 2D models, it's easy enough to utilize those existing model setups to run a second condition, which is which I've probably heard of, rain on grid, and get the picture of flooding not coming out of the bayou, but the water getting to the bayou. So this is an important flood risk product that we again hope to capture a large, sizable percentage of those flooding claims that have been missing from the maps in the back previously. And now again, this won't go on the firm, but with some of the other things we're working for, this is something that we can make a lot more forward-facing and utilize in the future. We have a lot of communication challenges with this project, and we're finding new ones every day. But there's a couple common themes that I just touch on. But since there's so many things changing, a lot of these risk map projects that we've noticed, it was easy to kind of point out to one or two things that were causing the changes. And in this process, everything is changing, down from how the methodology, to the software that's used, down to the ground. I mean, so there's subsidence, there's a whole host of things that are not easy to explain, but we have to try, of course. And so as we incorporate the new data methodologies, we also are incorporating, of course, all the physical changes, including subsidence, development, and then additionally new projects. So while there's a lot of anticipation for increases in the floodplain, we also have to be prepared to explain some of the decreases in the floodplain that we'll see due to some of these risk factors. In terms of where we're at right now, but this is a schedule of our overall project. But we got kicked off with FEMA in 2019. We've been preparing for even well before that. But in 2019. We kicked off the first phase of MapNext H&H development and model mapping development. We're currently got all 22 watersheds currently are kicked off and ongoing. But this is really what we think of as like an awareness and education phase. So we're building the tools and building the awareness about the study and about what's coming up in all the various communities, engineering community, and everyone we can get to listen. So that we can be prepared for the implementation phase. Once those preliminary maps are released, once the data becomes public, it'll change a lot, we expect, in that we don't have to ask people to pay attention. They're going to automatically be paying attention, I think, in a lot of ways. So we're using this phase as an opportunity to learn, and then also to reach out and back and forth ways, so that once we get to that implementation phase, we're ready to go. Some of the things we've been doing for that include, we've rolled out a really nice website, mapnext.org. I would encourage everyone to take a look if you haven't seen it already. But It's a very it's very slick looking. It's done very very well, and I think we've got a lot of good feedback. We're actually working on some updates right now that may or may not be live by the time this goes out, to add some interactive content and surveys, but as part of our special projects grant, we'll talk about in a second. But this has been effective of piquing a lot of people's interest and using to communicate out to the public, and at the same time developing a lot of content. We look at this, in TSARP it was the case, and we're looking at the case here on MapNext, that this is a good time. I mean, this is the perfect time to generate the content that will be used going forward for the next decade or two for communicating flood risk. So we've really been spending a lot of time and investment in trying to hone our messaging, hone these images, so that that they can be used going forward, and hopefully that's the case. But just talking about in terms as we developed our communications plan, something in Harris County is we're a very very diverse community, with a whole host of different different factors that we had to consider, such languages and how people, how various communities across Harris County actually access information and best use it. So we definitely took a lot of that into account as we developed our campaign. Also taking into account, again, I'm sure y'all are aware, but there's everyone's our audience and flood risk, and but trying to tap into and make sure that each one is getting addressed over the course of this project is difficult. But in part of our research, we spent a lot of time. We spent some time, trying to figure out where do people actually get their information on. I don't think it's surprising anybody, but online presence is becoming a lot more important. It's becoming, pretty much every demographic age group you'll see is increasing. It's been increasing over time. And even when you look at where online they're getting this information from, that it can be important. So we have our traditional news organizations here in Houston Chronicle, and others, but social media, of course, plays a huge role in that. And so as we take all that into account as we're rolling out a lot of this. But our commitment was to engage our audience and bring them in where we found them to be. So as part of our FEMA Special Project grant, which is focused on improving communications, we kind of stepped through in a few phases. Our first phase being billboards. I'm looking at the time, so I'll move over right there. The focus here was trying to drive participation in the flood insurance the participation in flood insurance. So we know that we have all the data to analyze and to figure out where the best places to set these billboards are, and using other social vulnerability social index information, we're able to find out maybe different languages billboards and where to place them where we can get the most impact. So comparing losses that we've seen versus spatially to where there's been a lack of participation, we use that data to basically figure out where these billboards should be placed. And using simple in-house developed simple messaging, these were placed up for a month across the county. The companies, of course, I forget the exact numbers, but they had astronomical number of millions of people driving by this. So supposedly millions of people saw these ads. But they were where they were directed to our website, and they were smart enough to actually get one right outside our office window. So we got the benefit of seeing that out there. Some lessons learned here is it was very hard to track the success of this campaign, being so short, and also there was a lot of factors going on at this time, a lot of storm events and things going on. So it was hard to directly measure the impact, but going back and looking at the data, we didn't see too much change here and there. So using some of those lessons learned, we moved into the second phase, the digital media ads, and these have a huge benefit of being able to be directly measurable. Not only that, but we're also excited about the potential to try out, not only can we figure out if, Facebook or, so HAR.com is our local realtor company in Harris County, where all the homes are posted on, but where we'll have the ability to see which platform is working for us, where we're getting the most interaction with, even with some follow-up surveys, see who actually learned the most. And then also, vary the ads within these platforms to see which ads worked and which ones didn't. So we hope to learn a lot from this. Where we're at right now, we actually hoped, writing this initial abstract, we initially hoped that we would be about halfway through this campaign. We're still working to get this started here first thing in July. But just to give you a preview of some of the ads that we're looking at, this is some of the examples that we're pulling from, and each one, again, will be varied slightly, see how, what's working, what's not. It's in a simple, I think it looks pretty good format, and kind of mirroring a little bit of that website. Also at the same time, we're building a lot of interactive tools that we hope to implement in a lot of these future meetings as well. This is one that we're actually pretty much done with, but COVID-19 kind of threw us for a loop here, but we're not sure about touching all this and how that's going to work with sanitation, but we'll get it figured out and roll it out once we've moved on from this. But this is something that, and if y'all, I think a lot of y'all have seen some of this before, but it's honestly very cheap, very easy system that's really fun for kids and even adults to play around with. And we're developing a little workshop around that to help explain flood risk that we'll be rolling out here soon. But just thinking about lessons learned and up to this point, to really starting from that billboard campaign and moving on, we really see that for mitigation, for in your community to gain support and to understanding what you need to do, it requires not just one data point, right? It requires kind of the whole package, which again MapNext is providing us. So you have to have the good data, good maps. And which is what we're working on, of course. But then once you have that, you have to have the resources, educational resources for people to point to, where even just knowing where they're at, so that you can point people to them is very important. And then of course awareness, we feel is very important to just to let people know about these studies, about these maps, about what they can do. If you have the best educational resources and data out there, but no one's aware of it, then it's not very useful. But and also again, access, how they letting people actually get a hold of these results in their hands, and then of course communicating everything above that effectively. Each one of these points has to be considered for an effective campaign and for successful mitigation to be implemented. But some of the other findings that we're aware of, success tracking is required, and we are very we're excited about at the end of this social media, and even during the social media campaign, to be able to track very efficiently the success and failure of any of our ads and how everything works. So and also with the digital media, it also has the benefit of being able to update real time. So even within a month into our campaign, which again, we're actually shooting about 3 to 4 month campaign here, we can actually make tweaks as needed so that we can hopefully end up with a more successful result. But and on top of everything, no matter how good your data is and how effective you're communicating, looking good really matters. I mean, again, that's going to a lesson learned from our ads, from our website. Is just the way human nature is it's very important. But we're trying to now put a lot of effort in making things look attractive and look good. So that helps keep people there and interested and more interested and more engaged. But some of the other things, looking at the clock, need to wrap up here soon. But some of the next steps that we're taking here in the next couple years, even before some of the results are released, is we're committing to some educational public meetings prior to results release. So taking all the messaging that we've gotten up to this point, developing a workshop and bringing people in, one-on-one to actually, is this working? Do they understand? How can we improve these results? And using that again to communicate to even our leaders, our community leaders, all the way down to the individual homeowners will be part of these workshops. And we hope to do this before the results are released, so that we again know exactly how to communicate these results as best as we can. And finally, to wrap it up, after TSARP, we developed what was called a flood education mapping tool, or FEMT. It was great for its day. What we're actually working on now and committed to is developing a best-in-class, a tool to interact and use and view the data possible. A lot of lessons learned here is you can't just tell people what the results are. You also have to give them context, explain exactly what it means, and then give them an action of what they can do next to take to improve their situation, to take any mitigation that they may be able to do. So once these results are released, we are committed to implementing a new tool that will give user specific reports on each location that based on where your home is or what you're interested in looking in, you'll have results tailored to you that will help easily explain every element, every flood risk product out there, and again, how to use it and how to make better decisions, because we understand that not everyone is in our work. Not everybody is part of this H&H flood risk community, and sometimes a lot more effort is required on our part just to get this message across and help people over the line of how to better their mitigation and again, always buy flood insurance. But it looks like I'm getting in right at the line. Again, my name is Brian Edmondson, and I guess I'll be sticking around for questions if there's any. Thank you
so much for joining us to answer and participate in some questions here that have been brought in. First off, I wanted to just make a quick thank you. I know the city of Houston, the Harris County area, has a lot of population that is new or transient to the area, maybe not growing up there and understanding the challenges of the city that they've moved into. So it's interesting that you're working on those platforms in order to provide people that baseline of information. There also was a quick shout out for your social media posts on Twitter at mapnext.com. So I wanted to make sure that you got that thank you from them. And a question from the group is, if your rate on grid data will not be shown on the firm, how does that information make a difference for local officials?
Yep. Like you saw on our last slide, we'll be putting out this information in a variety of different ways. Just because there's flood risk information, we develop a lot of flood risk information, a lot of it that does not end up on the firms. One of the things that I think FEMA, just being more familiar with Region 6, has had some viewers, and we're committed to developing as again a best in class, as good of a viewer tool to make that data as accessible as possible. But of course, this data will also be they'll have that for their own uses in-house. But again, I think knowing how sometimes even the technical limitations of some of our end users, just making that accessible and also providing the context with everything that we do provide is important, and will make it even more valuable.
Great. There was a question in the chat that I just want to address really quickly about being able to access these presentations or receive a copy. In the past, and generally after the proceedings complete, ASFPM will send out an email with a link to be able to interact with the presentations and download that source content. But also in this virtual sort of meeting session that we're having in the conference, please be aware that you can access a screenshot, slow down Zoom, and stop on anything that you'd like to through the end of the year. You'll have access to these presentations after they've been completed and are made available. There was a comment more than a question. They were indicating that hopefully the future development of all of this data will assist the county in getting the word out through a flood warning system. And so I know that Harris County works sort of off of the same models. I was wondering if you could address that for the folks.
Yeah, so actually, and I think we even have another presentation, I think tomorrow or the next day on the flood warning system that we do have here. So we've developed a really good comprehensive flood warning system with actually has near real-time inundation mapping based on the gauges. They're actually now undergoing even another upgrade to that, and then even in the future we'll be implementing a forecasting system. So we already have in place in the ground a current system that sees how much rainfalls occurred, monitoring the water levels and the inundation levels real time, and in the near future where we'll be implementing a forecast system as well. So that's something that we're also here at the district under a different department, but still here at the district that we're committed to doing and have been for some time.
Great. There's a question related to staffing this effort, sort of with the amount of folks that you have to talk to and the information that you have to get out. How are you sort of staffing your team in order to be able to address the outreach needs?
Well, for this project as a whole, it's a very large project. We have about 8 different engineering firms involved. We have a pretty robust communications department here at Flood Control, and we also have a communications team on board to support the overall effort. So, I mean, through the support of Flood Control and FEMA, we've been able to we have a good amount of staffing through those various avenues to support this project. But yeah, it's a lot, and we're trying to take it little by little and build up these pieces over time so that we can be ready when we know the real questions and the real heat's going to fire up when these results are released. And so we're taking this opportunity to get prepared for that right now.
Fantastic. I know that we're running a little over time, so I just want to take one more question, and then I'll work with you to get answers back for some of the remaining questions in the chat pod. The last question that I have for you is with some of those smart tables and digital displays in your map results for your public sessions is really cool. Like, do you have specifications on how to sort of take that data out to the public?
That's some of this. I mean, so that's actually, the kind of I put as the next phase we're working through right now. I will say that interactive sand table, there's really good online resources that we actually use. If you Google, I'm sorry I had to tell you to Google, but if you AR sand table, it's actually all open source. It was developed by a university, and there's a lot of people out there that are able to set that up relatively affordably. It's all open source with instruction manuals from A to Z, but we're still looking at the formatting and setting up those meetings. So again, because we have just with the standard FEMA process, a big open house process, but we're trying to again have kind of a smaller version of that beforehand, before even the results are released, so that we can I think from that last presentation, like, you learn, and and if we fail there, we'll not fail at those open houses because we'll have our lessons learned there. So
fantastic. Thank you all so much for your time and the great questions that came in. Brian, if you'll stay on the line with me, we'll work through some of those answers. And then I just want to make a plug. There's a plenary starting at 11 o'clock Central Time. So go ahead and join us there. Thanks so much for your time, and thanks for joining us in session A5, Risk Communication Tools.